Oh, my name is Nancy Singham, and I'm a writer for the Land Witness Project. I'd like to begin just by acknowledging that I'm personally speaking to you from historic Tiwa land, which I tend and honor the best I know how. And I'd also like to recognize the rest of the Land Witness Project collective who have built this project: creator and founder Delise Delios, writer Steffi Weisberg, media lead Ani Hanna, and our amazing videographer Christy Bodie. I'm going to speed through a little bit of history, specifically to address the question, what kind of problem is climate change? What we see in this little history is an accumulation of answers, each one stacking up on top of the next in a sort of a layer cake. So hope you're not too hungry. Although human-induced climate change definitely started way before this, let's start with the first layer of our cake in 1988. This was the year that James Hansen and others testified about climate change before the US Congress. In these hearings, climate change was expressed by climate scientists in scientific terms. You saw the graphs of the CO2 rise, the charts of warming temperatures, analysis of changing ocean chemistry, ice melting, so on and so on. So the first layer of our cake is climate change as a scientific problem. At the time, I really do think that most of us hoped that maybe this would be the only description of the problem that would be needed. Scientists explain what's happening scientifically, how bad the impacts would be. Everyone from school kids to policymakers would snap to it and get on to working on solutions. But as we are all keenly aware, this did not happen. And while it is certainly a scientific problem, there is definitely more to climate change than the scientific issue. In the years after 1988, there came around to a popular proposal to view climate change as an individual problem requiring a personal carbon footprint solution. I bet you've heard of this. The fact that this carbon footprint idea came in part from British Petroleum should have been a warning that maybe this was not the best way to state the problem. It's definitely true that individual action is essential, that all of us who can must raise our voices in alarm and take as much action as we can. And we also sadly acknowledge that there have already been literally hundreds of climate martyrs who have been murdered for their activity all over the world. But the truth is that even if we all succeeded in shrinking our personal carbon footprint as much as we can, this crisis would not be solved. So the second layer of our climate change description is that climate change at its basis is a collective problem requiring collective action. Climate change has also been expressed as a problem of all people. It's the idea that we've all caused this by consuming too much. But if you take a closer look, you will quickly find that climate change is definitely not a problem that has been created equally by every person on the planet. Some have contributed enormously and many, many others very, very little. And if you look further, you see that the negative effects of climate change are also far from distributed equally. In fact, the impact of climate change is most often greatest on those who have done almost nothing to contribute to it, both here in the United States and globally. It is already affecting first and most deeply Indigenous people around the world, people of color in general, and also women and children. In other words, the third layer of what kind of problem is this is that at its core, it is a problem of current and historic injustice and inequity. And thus, if we have to respond to this crisis in a way that heals and corrects that systemic injustices that we've seen in colonialism and racism rather than adding to them. So equity is the key to both our success and our survival. The fourth understanding of climate change, our little cake here that we have going, concerns what I call our species' essential relationship to our biosphere. What is that? Well, some have put forward the idea that climate change is a technical problem with a technical solution. For example, all we need to do is swap out solar and wind for coal, electric vehicles for gas-powered cars, and we're back to business as usual. And while we do definitely need massive technological innovation on everything from concrete to ocean ships, jet planes to battery storage, this is not the essence of the problem. Much of Western industrial society has long held the view that the entire living planet exists exclusively for people to conquer, to use up, and then to throw away wherever that is. This concept is deeply ingrained in colonial history and frankly is still alive and well today. But a different conception, long held by many traditional and indigenous cultures, holds that our species is one part of a complex, amazing system of billions of living beings, that we cannot succeed as a species without having a proper relationship to that entire biosphere, the complexity, depth, and wonder of which we are just beginning to grasp. Faced with a rate of species extinctions that is hundreds or even thousands of times higher than the natural baseline rate, we're starting to see movements such as the Green Amendment, many rights of nature movements from Lake Erie to Ecuador, all of which recognize that species and ecosystems are not simply resources for humans to use, but are living entities with essential value of their own. And finally, the last step on this speedy journey is what I'm calling the actual experience of climate change. Going back to 1988, climate change then was seen as a vague threat that would emerge in the future. Everyone talked about the effects on people's grandchildren. Well, friends, those grandchildren are now 30 years old and the future is here. In the US alone, from California wildfire victims to the flooded cities of Houston, New Orleans, and New York, for those experiencing climate injustice from Louisiana to South Carolina to New Mexico, we are now actually experiencing the reality that this is no longer the same world that we were born into, even if you were born 10 or 15 years ago. For each of us, our own personal experience of this change involves not just our thoughts, but also it affects our emotions, our psychology, culture, families, faith, and our communities. We can't deal with issues of our very survival without being able to express our fear, our grief, our anxiety, as well as our courage and hope. With so much at stake, we cannot possibly build a real movement for change that doesn't invite us to join together in solidarity, to comfort each other as humans, and to allow time to cry and to mourn, as well as to organize and fight. So this is the layer cake that is behind the creation of the Land Witness Project, which through local storytelling brings together the science, the collective action, the need for justice, the proper role of our species in the web of life, and our personal and local experiences of climate change. We're aiming to contribute to solving the global problem with local stories from New Mexicans whose daily lives, livelihoods, and ways of life are already being affected. In addition to the personal, every one of these storytellers is surrounded by a community of people that they influence, from downhill skiers to friends of the Bosque del Apache, from pecan growers to river rafters and cattle ranchers to South Valley farmers. It is our hope that these personal stories of leadership and action will move and inspire both those around the storytellers and the rest of us to even greater and more effective action. Thank you.